How to Retire with Enough Money and How to Know What Enough Is by Teresa Ghilarducci. Introduction. Welcome to the do-it-yourself system of retirement planning in America. Wait, you did know you're in a DIY system, right? On average, Social Security replaces about 40% of the income you earned before retiring. It's up to you to arrange the rest. Intimidated? Don't be. Planning a prosperous retirement is easy if you follow these 6 simple steps. First, predict when you and your spouse or partner will retire, be laid off, or be physically and mentally unable to keep your job. Second, predict when you will die. Third, save more than 7% of every dollar you earn, starting when you're 25. Oh, you're 55 now? Just save 30% of every dollar. Fourth, earn at least 3% above inflation on your investments every year. How? Find the best funds for the lowest price and optimally allocate them. Don't forget to get out just before a financial crisis and get back in just when the crisis has bottomed out. Fifth, do not withdraw any funds if you lose your job, have health troubles, get divorced, buy a house, or send a son or daughter to college, or bail him or her out of jail if you don't have an honor student type of kid. Sixth, time your retirement account withdrawals so that the last cent isn't spent until the day you die. See? Easy. Of course, the truth is that it's not easy at all. The 401k account, which ushered in the do-it-yourself era, has been with us since 1978. And here's how it's worked out so far. As of this writing, the majority of Americans over 50 have $30,000 or less saved for retirement. A third of them have nothing saved. 49% of middle-class Americans are on track to be living in or near poverty after they quit working. They'll have a food budget of about $5 a day. These are sobering figures. By 2030, the last of the baby boomers will be 65. Right now, 12% of the population, or about 43 million people, are over age 65. By 2030, almost 73 million, more than 20% will be. The population in general will grow, but the over 65 segment will grow faster. From now until 2030, more than 8,000 Americans will reach age 65 every day. Even if poverty rates for the elderly stay the same as they are today, the sheer numbers of elderly poor will be at record highs, more than 5 million, up from 3 million in 2010. The bottom line, too many people are facing a future in which they'll have to keep working indefinitely. They'll be dependent on an uncertain job market and on government programs perpetually threatened by budget cuts. They'll be living on someone else's terms. How do I know all this? Because I've spent my professional life studying the economics of retirement. It's been my specialty as a professor of economics, first at the University of Notre Dame, and now at the New School for Social Research in New York City. I also have more than 20 years of practical experience. I was a presidential appointee to the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation that insures traditional pensions for 40 million workers and a gubernatorial trustee of the $12 billion Indiana Public Employees Retirement Fund. I'm currently a trustee of a retiree healthcare fund of more than $53 billion, which provides for just under 1 million employees benefits for former steel and auto workers. Because of my professional bona fides, friends often talk to me intimately about their finances. I'm happy to have these conversations, but what I hear worries me. Smart, educated people would rather put money into exotic and risky investments than pay off a loan that's costing them interest every day. They get their ideas about money from screaming headlines, hot tips, and overheard conversations, or they trust their money to inadequately trained financial managers and brokers paid on commission. Case in point, not too long ago, a man earning well over $130,000 per year confided to me at a dinner party that he had $300,000 in assets for retirement, plus a traditional pension. This man thought he hadn't saved enough to be able to maintain his current lifestyle. I mentally estimated his mortality, knew he had Social Security, and figured that he didn't need to worry, provided he died sooner than he expected, which I thought he would because he was a heavy smoker with a stressful work and personal life. Congratulations. Sort of. An early death shouldn't be anyone's first line of defense against poverty, but for too many people it is. Many don't even have what that dinner party guest had, a six-figure savings balance and a pension. To repeat what I said above, a majority of Americans nearing retirement age have less than $30,000 saved for retirement. And for most people, an old-fashioned pension is a thing of the past. To put that into perspective, consider this. To retire at a standard of living similar to the one he or she has during their working lives, the average person with no other retirement plan besides Social Security will need 8 times his or her annual salary in retirement accounts. What that adds up to will vary, since 90% of Americans' working households live on an amount between $20,000 and $190,000 per year. For a household living on $50,000 per year, that means $400,000 in actual assets or an annuity equivalent. But a couple wanting to live on $190,000 per year starting at age 65 will need a lot more, $1.5 million. What I said earlier is so important. I'm going to repeat it yet again. The majority of Americans have less than $30,000 saved, and a third of Americans have nothing at all, although they need approximately $160,000 for those earning $20,000 yearly to $1.5 million to supplement Social Security. It's an enormous shortfall. Furthermore, money for basic expenses is not all people need in retirement. They'll need to pay for the medical expenses that Medicare doesn't cover. The average middle-class American knows that. However, she estimates she needs about $47,000 for out-of-pocket medical costs in old age, when in reality, the figure is closer to $250,000. Phrased differently, $250,000. Sounds a lot scarier that way, doesn't it? In light of this bleak picture, is there any hope for the average person trying to create a secure, comfortable retirement? I believe there is. In many years of listening to friends' financial plans and giving them advice, I've had many success stories. Consider this one. One day, an English professor at Notre Dame overheard me ranting about the stock market in the lunchroom. That night, he converted all of his retirement accounts to a secure annuity. He thanked me 4 years later when he retired. That was a case of advice I didn't even realize I was giving, but it worked out well. However, too often I've wished I could have done more to help friends and colleagues. Too often I know they're walking away from these conversations feeling that my advice is too little too late. They're staring down the barrel of a retirement coming up in a few short years, and they don't have nearly the savings they'll need. Oddly enough, all this is happening while bookstore shelves are all but collapsing under the weight of financial planning books, many of them specifically about retirement. The world is full of financial gurus, each with a special plan about what have to do to get rich. Generally, these experts have the best of intentions, yet too frequently their books are overlong and padded with unnecessary material. Some feature complicated worksheets, others take a psycho-spiritual approach, suggesting that your outlook on life is a large part of what will make you wealthy. Yet others fill up their 250 plus pages with definitions of stop orders and stop limit orders versus plain market orders. Unfortunately, it's hard for readers to learn anything when their eyes are glazing over. Worst of all, many books shame the reader, suggesting that the current mess was created solely by average people who lack financial literacy and who buy venti lattes instead of carrying a thermos to work, as if only your thirst for gourmet coffee stands between you and a secure retirement. Once again, it's hard for readers to open their minds to financial advice when they've been put on the defensive about how they've handled their money so far. I saw the need for a retirement planning book that would be accessible, free of lecturing, and most of all, short. The friends who've asked me for advice would have politely taken a weighted book full of worksheets. They would have put it on their shelves, intending to read it someday, but they would almost immediately read a short, simple, and direct book, one that acknowledges that retirement planning is a scary subject, but explains how to get past fear to a plan. So I wrote one. Chapter 1, Facing the Facts. Or, if you're not worried, you probably don't understand the situation. Think for a moment about the last ad you saw for a mutual fund. Did it feature a fit, salt and pepper haired couple in their 60s on a terrace or a boat watching the sunset? These ads aren't selling you a mutual fund. They're selling you an ideal life. Invest with us, these advertisers say, and this is what your future will look like. The future that many Americans see for themselves is a little different. I know because many kinds of people write to me at my website and they're afraid. I didn't work while my kids were young, one 59-year-old woman told me, and after my divorce, I didn't have a job for more than 5 years. My second husband has a pension from the city, but I don't know if it is enough. I told him we have to do something. She's not alone in feeling this way. A lot of people realize they're in trouble. These worries can put a lot of strain on relationships. Another person wrote to me, my wife is 64 and a half, and I'm 67 and a half. We're both retired and have a home that's paid for. We both get Social Security and have a fair amount in savings. After 41 and a half years of marriage, we've learned how to discuss money and still remain reasonably calm and unemotional. I keep thinking we're rich. She's ready to go pick up soda bottles, and I suspect the reality is somewhere in between. Our 2 children don't need anything from us except continuing love and acceptance. My reason for writing is that I feel it's time to smell the roses and I'd rather not fit that in while also collecting soda bottles to cash in. Clearly, there's a lot of anxiety out there, and a lot of people are trying to take action. They're vowing to give up going out to lunch, they're reading investment advice, and they're turning to individual boots on the ground measures to rescue their retirement plans. But what many people don't realize is this: we had help getting into this current mess, and we need help getting out. The 401k IRA conundrum. Although personal responsibility is an important part of retirement planning, the looming crisis isn't all being caused by individuals who can't deny themselves electronic sports watches and designer handbags. We've been convinced that the jam we're in is our own fault, but it's not. This isn't just a personal problem, it's a national problem. How did that happen? I'm glad you asked. The traditional pension used to be the dominant model in America. Why is this significant? Because a traditional pension is a defined benefit plan, one that guarantees a fixed amount to the retiree. Here's how it works. The employee has a mandatory deduction taken from his paycheck throughout his working life, supplemented by contributions from his employer, although in some companies the employer alone funds the pension. The money is held in a fund and invested by a professional. Then, after retirement, and this is the key point, the employee is guaranteed a fixed sum benefit for the rest of his life. The company has an obligation to send that monthly check no matter how the pension fund's investments perform. You can see why the choice of a financial professional to oversee the pension fund is a key hiring decision. If the pension plan's funds are poorly handled, the company will have to dip into other sources of money, such as profits, to pay off its obligations. A word about terminology here. The plan I've just described is what I usually call a traditional pension, but because the term is going to come up so often, I'm just going to use the word pension. So when you see it, that's what I mean. From the 1960s to the mid-1990s, about 75% of full-time American workers were covered by a pension. And it was a model that worked well for them. It gave people a guaranteed income after they stopped working. Equally important, during their careers, it allowed them to concentrate on what they did best, from building airplane engines to selling overcoats, without having to be amateur money managers in their evening and weekend hours. Finally, a not insignificant benefit of the pension and Social Security as well was that it gave retired people a reliable income so they were able to keep spending and stimulating the economy. This was part of what made the American economy more stable in the middle of the 20th century than it is now. That was how retirement generally worked until the late 1970s, when an accountant noticed a provision in the tax code implemented at the request of a large company that allowed highly paid executives to take a tax break on deferred income. The accountant began promoting this tax provision to other companies, and the IRS allowed it, but only if employers allowed everyone working for the company into the plan. The idea caught on, and a new kind of retirement account was born, named for the loopholes placed in the tax code, subsection 401k. What's important about this short history lesson is this. The 401k was originally supplementary in nature, a way for highly compensated executives to get a tax break on money set aside for retirement. This humbly named plan was never meant to be a replacement for traditional pensions. If it had been, it wouldn't have been given the dull name 401k. It would have been called the Great American Pension Plan. However, employers found the 401k plan to be cheaper than traditional plans. It was explained to the average employee this way. The 401k would give the employee freedom to invest retirement savings or not invest. It isn't a mandatory program as he or she chose. Although the 401k managers and the possible investment vehicles will be the choice of the employer, employees have no say in these things. Plus, money put into a 401k account wouldn't be taxed until it was withdrawn at retirement age. Even better, often there would be matching funds from the company, 50 cents on the dollar usually on the 3 to 6% of pay that employees were allowed to contribute. That's free money. You can't beat free money. The problem? Whereas a pension is a defined benefit plan, a 401k is a defined contribution plan. And a defined contribution plan depends entirely on how much money an employee can afford to contribute. And remember, contributing is entirely voluntary, as well as the employer's match. How much is contributed, plus how well it is invested, determines how much money a 401k plan participant has after retirement. There is no fixed amount for the benefit, no guaranteed monthly amount that keeps coming for the rest of one's life. When the money in the plan is gone, it's gone. There are some inarguable nice perks to the 401k plan, but the employer's contribution to an employee's 401k is voluntary, and not all employers make one. Others contribute very little. Of course, the larger problem is when employees themselves don't put any money into a 401k. Young people earning less and perhaps saving for a house or to start a family might look at their paychecks and be unable to see how they could afford to put money into a 401k. Of course, if they don't contribute at all, they get no tax break and no employer match. And worse, no money is set aside toward retirement, a drawback that will come home to roost sooner than they think. And the tax breaks that make these plans so attractive, they work out much better for higher earners who can comfortably set aside the maximum contribution, thereby getting a bigger tax break and the largest possible employer match. 80% of retirement account tax breaks go to the wealthiest 20% of taxpayers. The move to 401k plans shifted most risk from the company to the worker, who now found himself the manager of a pension fund for one. Employees didn't ask for this change. Neither did unions. The shift to 401k plans was spearheaded by big business, which was more than happy to relinquish responsibility for sending its retirees a fixed pension check every month. The tax break and the employer match were the spoonful of sugar that eased this bad medicine down the throats of the regular employees, for whom the 401k was a poor substitute for a defined benefit plan. Along with the 401k, the individual retirement account, or IRA, rose to prominence during this time. IRAs provided a similar service to those who didn't have a 401k through their work, or who were leaving or changing jobs, but most 401k money ends up in the less regulated individual retirement accounts. If 401k plans offered a dangerous amount of responsibility and freedom to the individual worker, they at least limited choices in investments to the families of mutual stock and bond funds offered by the employer. But IRAs are really the Wild West. with the individual able to choose virtually any investment he or she wants. Want to be 100% in airline stocks? No problem. Thus began what I like to call the do-it-yourself end of retirement planning. The DIY system works only if average people save voluntarily, sometimes at very high levels, and are savvy enough to find low-risk investments with low management fees. It requires people to keep their heads and not withdraw money during financial downturns or during personal or family emergencies. Thus, the theory goes, they'll retire having saved enough money to last the rest of their lives, regardless of how long that is or if the health problems they have in their final years. To put it mildly, this hasn't happened. What would you expect if you were all asked to cut our own hair, install our own toilets, and do our own electrical wiring? A few of us would succeed at one of the three, but there would be an awful lot of bold-haired cuts, flooded bathrooms, and smoldering houses out there. However, although 401k plans have problems, not having one is worse. So, if you have a 401k, contribute the maximum amount and take steps to protect your money. I'll show you how. The 401k offers two significant advantages. First, you aren't taxed on income contributed to a 401k, reducing your annual tax bill. You'll be taxed on your withdrawals, but for many people, the later years are a more advantageous time to be taxed because many of us are in a lower tax bracket in retirement. Second, many employers will match your contributions at 50 cents to the dollar, up to a maximum of 6% of your pay. If you earn $100,000 a year and put $6,000 a year into your 401k, your company would add $3,000. You're also reducing your adjusted gross income, the taxable amount, by $6,000. So the 401k can be a major building block in your retirement, provided it's used correctly. By this, I mean that you actually need to contribute to one. That might sound obvious, but a key reason 401k plans haven't worked on the national level is that Americans, for various reasons, have failed to put money in them consistently and at sufficient levels. Another key point about using 401k plans right is that you need to protect your funds from unrewarding risk and from being eaten up by management fees. I'll explain how to do that later in Chapter 5. As I noted at the beginning of this section, the retirement crisis is a national problem, and as it currently stands, the government isn't close to fixing it. For now, the stark truth is that it is up to you to pull yourself out of this hole we're all dug in. The starting point for this needed change. It's facing the facts, although it's hard and scary to do that. I explained in the introduction that the average middle-class American believes he or she will need about $47,000 for health care in retirement, whereas the number is closer to $250,000. What's behind that roughly $200,000 disparity? Cognitive dissonance, largely. What is cognitive dissonance and why is it keeping me from saving? Consider the following situation. You want to lose weight. However, your coworker has brought a plate of homemade cookies to the break room. You then encounter dissonant facts. I'd love a cookie, but I'd also love to lose weight, and cookies are high in calories. When the facts don't line up with our desires and needs, we feel mental discomfort. So we introduce more facts that make the dissonance go away, at least for the moment. In the case of the break room cookies, you might solve the problem with a set of new facts and accompanying rationalizations. those cookies have oatmeal and raisins in them, which are healthful. Plus, I don't want to hurt my coworkers' feelings. Therefore, I can eat one. Rationalization is one way people resolve cognitive dissonance. They change one side of the equation, adjusting the facts until they're more psychologically comfortable. Sometimes people go further, employing what's known as magical thinking, promoting an enjoyable fantasy to a near certainty. For example, a person nearing retirement with only $30,000 in his or her accounts might think, I know I'll invest in a wide variety of penny stocks. At least one of them has to hit, and then I'll be rich. Penny stocks are stocks that trade at less than $5 a share, meaning that if one did increase sharply in value, a small investment could pay off big. It's like betting a small amount of money on a racehorse that goes off at 100 to 1 odds. Unfortunately, the horse earned those odds, just like penny stocks earned their nickname. The horse is slow and the stocks are bad. Putting your money on either isn't a plan. It's a get-rich-quick fantasy. Do I even need to add that you shouldn't count on winning the lottery either? Both these ideas are prime examples of magical thinking. So if you're worried, that's a positive sign. It means you haven't retreated into denial and magical thinking. You're doing something smart. You're getting real and facing facts, and that's the first step forward. A roadmap to change. In the rest of this book, I'm going to help you get past your fear and create a plan. In the next chapter, I'll show you how to get a grasp on how much money you'll need at retirement, as well as how to estimate how much you're on track to have coming in. In chapter 3, I talk about why it's smart to delay getting Social Security until age 70, the age at which you can get full benefits. We'll also look at some of the barriers older people face when trying to stay in the workforce and talk about how to increase your chances of staying employed. In chapter 4, I talk about saving money, the good ideas and the bad ideas for trimming your spending. Chapter 5 is about smart investing and proper asset allocation and the role debt should, or more to the point, shouldn't play in your finances. And in chapter 6, I discuss a subject retirement books leave completely off the table: politics. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are government programs that will provide the most secure income and medical insurance for you and anyone over 65. The government is your key retirement planning partner. Being a fully engaged, savvy partner is a key fifth step in securing a good retirement for yourself and your community, as well as making sure your kids don't have to take care of you in your old age. Chapter 2, Bringing Your Picture into Focus, or how to estimate the retirement income you need and calculate what you're likely to have. If you've read other books about retirement planning, you're probably familiar with the concept of the number, that magic amount you'll need to have saved for retirement. Maybe you've wondered, is it really possible for me to come up with a dollars and cents figure? The answer, tentatively, is yes. I can't give specific financial advice in a book any more than a responsible doctor would give readers specific medical advice. However, I can provide you with the guidelines you'll need to sit down with a pencil, paper, and calculator and come up with a rough estimate of the income you'll need in retirement and how much you're on track to have. The disparity between the two will tell you how much saving you've got to do. How much income will I need? The short answer enough to preserve your pre-retirement standard of living. That's what economists mean when we talk about a secure retirement. Generally, people want to go on living mostly the same way they did during their working years, except without that tedious going to work part. They want to buy the same kinds of groceries, pursue the same hobbies, and shop for clothes at the same stores. There might be outliers. A person with a modest income who dreams about retiring to an ocean house with a sailboat, or a couple with a big house and an expensive lifestyle who plan to downsize and live simply in a 2-bedroom house working in the garden. But these outliers aren't the people economists are talking about when we discuss the big issues surrounding retirement. We're talking about the average person who wants to lead a life that fits into approximately the same budget. But how do you put pre-retirement standard of living in dollar terms? Here's what you need to know. If you're like most people, in retirement you'll need 70 to 80% of your pre-tax pre-retirement income. If you earn $100,000 per year, you'll need $70,000 per year at minimum to maintain your standard of living. Personally, I'm aiming for 100%. But many people can live on a bit less because they won't have work expenses in retirement. Commuting costs such as gasoline and bridge tolls, upkeep on a work wardrobe, the expenses of child rearing, and, of course, saving for retirement. However, some costs will increase as you age. Medical expenses, for example. Ideally, though, you'll see a net drop in expenses. An important note here. The 70% target assumes you'll have paid off your mortgage by the time you retire. Start making plans now to make that happen, because the numbers on this point are trending downward. In 2014, only 65% of older people were mortgage-free, whereas in the 1980s, more than 80% of seniors owned their home outright. The biggest factor in whether you can live comfortably on 70% of your previous income is where you stood on the income ladder most of your life. Wealthy people who are willing to cut non-necessary expenses can get by fairly easily on 70%. The working poor, however, can't. They'll likely need more than 100% because they have no indulgences to trim from their budget, and medical expenses increase substantially after retirement, even with insurance. It's likely that you fall somewhere between those two extremes. That's why economists suggest that for many middle-class individuals, closer to 50% of pre-retirement income is approximately what's needed. That is an argument for downsizing your lifestyle now. Why? Because you're almost certainly not going to have 100% of your income in retirement. In fact, if your employer doesn't offer a pension and you're one of the 1/3 of middle-class Americans who has no money in a retirement account, you're likely on track to have about 40 to 50% of the annual income you had in your working life. In 2011, married Americans aged 55 to 64 in the bottom half of income distribution had assets of only $130,000, including their house. Those couples in the next 40% of income distribution with incomes between $52,000 and $140,000 a year had an average of $350,000 in total wealth, home equity, retirement accounts, and so on. And married couples in the top 10%, I'm still worried about them. Yes, they have incomes above $140,000 per year and an average total of about $450,000 in their houses, retirement accounts, and so on. But assuming half the wealth is in their house, leaving them with $220,000 to draw down over the rest of their lives. That'll give them about $10,000 per year, which, even with Social Security, is a long way away from $140,000. Honestly, I'm not trying to scare you into hopelessness here. It's the opposite. I hope to motivate you to fiercely pursue a solid solution to your old age income challenge. First, we'll start with a realistic picture of the future so you can bring your savings and your current lifestyle into line with it. Once you know you're on track to cover the bare minimum of what you'll need later, you can always save more. First, though, you need to understand a little more about where retirement income usually comes from: Social Security, a pension, and savings. The role of Social Security. Traditionally, economists call Social Security, pensions, and personal savings the three-legged stool of retirement income. This isn't a good metaphor, though, since not all the legs are of equal size as they would be on a usable stool. Social Security is the most important leg for most Americans, replacing 40 to 50% of pre-retirement income for middle-class individuals. Those with higher income who earn more than $118,500 per year will get 29% or less from Social Security. Low-income workers, those making less than $40,000 per year, will have about 90% of their income replaced by Social Security. If you fall in the middle, getting 40 to 50%, that won't be enough. The rest has to come from a pension and or your savings. But as I've already noted, fewer and fewer people have a pension nowadays. That's why individual retirement planning has become so important. It's the only thing that'll keep many people from having to scrape by on the roughly 40% that Social Security provides. People are going to need to supplement their income from Social Security with at least 20 to 30% of their pre-retirement income drawn from pensions or a retirement account. For those who don't have a pension and haven't saved enough, or those who had to leave their career a little sooner than they expected, and most people, sadly, say they retired sooner than they intended because they were laid off, physical or mentally limitations prevented them from doing their job, or a spouse's health deteriorated. A post-retirement job is increasingly the third tier of the retirement pyramid, or at least a part of the third tier. America is certainly unique in having many elderly people depend on working for retirement income. Note the irony. If I'm working, how is that retirement? Unfortunately, it's just the reality of life in a country that has both a crumbling employer-based retirement system and an economy that creates more low-income jobs than any other developed nation on the planet. More Americans will have to turn to a part-time, non-career track job to make ends meet in retirement. I'll talk more about the other realities of working later in life in the next chapter. How much income will I have? Knowing that retirement income generally has three sources: Social Security, a pension, and savings, it's possible to estimate how much you'll get upon retirement from these sources, but it's not necessarily easy. Your income will be dependent on your earnings history, how your investments perform, and your savings rate. The younger you are, when you do this calculation, the more likely it is that your circumstances will change over time. Even so, It's useful to get an idea of where things stand right now. You can always adjust your thinking as time passes. Social Security. At ssa.gov, you can check your earning history and the estimated amount of your future monthly check. Remember, though, that amount assumes that your earnings history will continue on the same trend. If you take time off from work or are laid off, your Social Security benefit will adjust downward. If you get a promotion with a sizable raise, it will go up. There's one more important thing you should know about your future Social Security check. Its size will vary significantly depending on several factors. These include how old you are when you start collecting, how long you worked. You'll have to have worked at least 40 quarters or 10 years over the course of your adult life by the time you collect. And how much you earned. In general, if you were a high earner and retired at age 70 in 2014, your Social Security benefit would be a bit more than $3,400 per month. Your pension. If you get a pension, your plan handbook will tell you how to estimate your monthly benefit. In the average pension plan, a retiree will replace 2% of his or her income for every year worked. A 15-year employee would replace 30%. A 20-year employee would get a 40%, and so on. Your estimate then will depend on how long you expect to have worked for your employer when you retire. However, policies vary. You may want to ask your HR representative to help you make this approximation. Savings. Here, I'm considering what the final balances will be on your 401k and IRA accounts. Your house can be part of your savings picture, especially if you're willing to sell it later in life. But for most people, the bulk of their savings is in retirement accounts, so that's what I'm concentrating on. Your 401k and IRA balances at retirement will depend on how much you contribute, how well your investments perform, and how much of those returns you've lost over the years to bank and brokerage fees. It's technically possible for you to use a compounding calculator to estimate how much money you'll have accumulated in 20 or 25 years' time, but it's unwise. A compounding calculator will ask you for at least 4 things: the initial contribution, what you have in savings right now, your annual contribution, meaning what you earn, what you expect your raises will be, and what percentage of your earnings you will contribute each year. If you use a compounding calculator, try to be realistic and an assumed rate of return. The rate of return is the part that can be a problem. Why? Most compounding calculators set a rate of return that's too high because investment fees aren't taken into account. When you use a calculator, force down the assumed rate of return to 3% without inflation and 5% with inflation. I go a little lower because, well, I'm an economist and I'm conservative on this issue. These are pretty healthy targets for the growth rate in the world economy. If you decide to use a compounding calculator, use those figures no matter what the stock market is doing this year. You don't want to estimate too high a rate of return and get a false sense of security. A side note here, I like the AARP retirement calculator because it calculates your Social Security benefit and you can change the assumptions easily. Here's an example. You're 50 years old. You earn $100,000 per year. You want to retire at age 67, and you would like to achieve about the same lifestyle you have now. You have $100,000 in your IRA and plan to contribute 10% of your salary per year to your 401k. Here is how the calculator and its assumed rate of return influence your plans. If you assume that you'll earn 6% on your original $100,000 plus the additional contributions during the rest of your career and 3.6% after you retire, the calculator tells you that you'll have more than enough money. But if you assume 3% growth from the outset, it tells you you don't have enough. Your lower assumptions on growth lead you to save about 3% more of your salary for retirement. Hey, what's the worst that can happen? If your returns outperform these cautious assumptions, you'll have enough money to improve your lifestyle in retirement, or you'll be recovered if you live a little longer. How much can I spend in retirement? By the day you stop working, if you're like most people, you'll need at least 8 times your annual income in retirement accounts. 10 times is better. How do economists derive this figure? By assuming a 3 to 5% withdrawal amount each year. A safe withdrawal amount, the amount you can take out and be assured you will not run out of money before you die, depends on your annual rate of return, which, of course, varies. As noted, 3 to 5% is the suggested range, because 4% is the average historical rate of return on a moderately safe portfolio. It's obvious that the rate of return you earn on savings and investments will have a big effect on how long your money lasts. Less obvious is what that return will be and how much it will fluctuate. There have been long periods of time when CDs and government bonds earned a decent interest rate, and periods of time when interest rates have been quite low. Ultimately, there is no such thing as a perfectly risk-free withdrawal rate, but 4% is a reasonable rule of thumb, and I will use it for examples in this book. If you want to get fancy and vary your rate as you get older, use the nifty rules from the IRS on required minimum distributions. They have the same goals you do. The IRS doesn't want you to run out of money in retirement, but it also doesn't want you to leave tax-free money to your heirs. That's why the IRS has minimum distribution rules for 401k and IRA balances. You have to withdraw funds starting when you reach age 70.5. Those rules are a very sensible way to plan. Let's look at an example. A 67-year-old who earns $75,000 a year. This is pre-tax income, as will be all the numbers in my examples unless noted otherwise. He'll have about 35% of that income, or $26,250 per year, replaced by Social Security. He wants to live on 70% of his pre-retirement income, or $52,500. Social Security gives him half of that, so his savings will need to provide the other $26,250 a year. Thus, he'll need to have saved roughly $500,000. If he withdraws 5.25% yearly, that gives him $26,250. Getting the withdrawal rate right hardly matters, though, if it can't cover the spending he'll need to do. One of the biggest money mistakes people make is underestimate their spending. People forget that every few years they'll have to make repairs on their homes and cars, and that there will be inflation on basic items. They also might not realize that even if they have health insurance, they still have to pay for co-pays, premiums, and non-covered expenses. So, Keeping that in mind, our 67-year-old needs to have a budget to monitor spending needs and withdrawals on a year-by-year basis, and he'll need to make adjustments often. Is this sustainable in the long term? That depends on how long our retiree expects to live. Dinky Towns, how long will my retirement savings last? Calculator tells us that with a conservative 3% rate of return on his investments and inflation at 5%, he can fund 16 years and 3 months of retirement at this rate. If he lives longer, he'll be living solely on Social Security, a pretty harsh drop in income, especially that late in life. You can see there are a lot of unknowns in play here. Might this man live longer than 16 years in retirement? Could he get a better return on his investments than 3% on average? Does he dare to gamble on these things? I'd vote no. Hoping for an early death or a better return isn't a retirement plan. He's better off planning to live more frugally than 70% of his income. Okay, back to your estimation process. If you'd rather calculate your retirement income in monthly terms than in annual, that's fairly easy. The Social Security Administration website already gives estimated benefits as a monthly sum, and your HR rep or plan handbook will likely do the same for a pension. As for your lifetime lump sum savings, they'll translate into monthly income this way. Every $24,000 will generate roughly $100 in monthly income. These 2 or 3 estimates added together are the monthly income you're on track to have in retirement. Now go back to the estimate of the income you'll need to live on in retirement. That's 70% of your current annual earnings. Divide it by 12 to get a monthly amount and compare it with your projected monthly income. Are the two figures close to equal? If not, you can console yourself with the fact that you're not alone. Many Americans are facing a shortfall, but at least you now have a sense of the problem. That's the first step. Facing the unknowns, life expectancy, and job security. The guidelines above are fairly helpful in allowing you to do the math and figure out any gap in your savings. But an important variable can throw those estimates off. It's this: how long will you be retired? This is actually 2 questions in one. First, when will you have to quit working? 2, how long will you live after you quit working? You'll notice that I say have to quit working, not want to retire. If you're so comfortable financially that you have a choice about when to retire, that's wonderful. But if you're reading this book, that may not be the case. And, in fact, my years of study into the looming crisis have made it clear to me that most Americans aren't happily considering an early retirement. They're afraid that layoffs or other circumstances will force them out of their jobs before they have adequate savings to fund a comfortable old age. So let's look at how to realistically estimate how long you can work. Some of us are lucky and will be able to stay in our jobs as long as we please. There are university departments where even the entirety of the junior and non-tenured faculty jumping on the end of a very long crowbar couldn't dislodge a senior tenured professor. But those employment situations are rare. Ask yourself, is your work physically demanding? Do you have to pass an annual physical to stay employed? If not, Is there pressure to retire at a certain age nonetheless? If your answer to those questions is no, consider this. Is your field prone to layoffs? Is there a high incidence of burnout? Is your work psychologically stressful and subject to a high degree of supervision? The point is, you may want to work until age 67, but you have to be realistic about whether you can. Now, let's move on to life expectancy. This is where the planning process gets a little creepy. You have to estimate when you might die and when your spouse might die, but not obsess about it. A lot of factors are in play here, but 3 are primary. 1. Do you smoke? 2. Are you overweight? 3. Do you have good or bad genes? You know the answer to the first 2 questions. About the third, here's a good rule of thumb. Look to your parents and grandparents. How long did they live? Did any of them die relatively young from diseases that tend to run in families? The upshot: if you didn't inherit bad genes and you don't smoke, it's likely that you'll live into your late 80s. Might you last even longer than that? It's possible. People who make it to their late 80s have about a 20% chance of living about 7 years longer. Health experts can't get more precise than that. Life expectancy is an inexact science. By now, you've probably noticed a recurring theme running through everything I've discussed. It's this: life's uncertain. No matter how much careful calculating you've done, and no matter what those estimations are showing you, things could change. You could be laid off. You or your partner could get a chronic illness, or you could live to the age of 99. The moral of the story: you'd be wise to save beyond what your current estimates are telling you you'll need. Personally, I'm shooting to have accumulated 15 times my annual income by the time I retire, though that's ambitious. Pass the calculator. Maybe you're not comfortable doing these kinds of back of the envelope estimates yourself. Or perhaps you want to really fine-tune your projections. In either case, online calculators can be very helpful. They let you plug in numbers and estimates specific to your situation. I recommend the AARP's retirement calculator. It can be found on aarp.org. The calculator will ask your age, your salary, your savings, and some questions about Social Security and the sort of lifestyle you imagine your older self having before giving you an estimate of how much money you'll need at retirement and how much you're likely to have if you continue to earn and save at your current levels. Another source of information is dinkytown.net. This website has a funny name, but if you like calculators, you're going to be quite impressed. Dinkytown offers a variety of calculators on Social Security benefits, 401k plans, Roth versus traditional IRAs, and more that can help you seriously crunch the numbers you have. Of particular interest is the calculator labeled "How long will my retirement savings last?" To see how all of these factors play out in real life situations, let's look at 4 hypothetical people approaching the end of their working lives. Carol and Mark, the affluent non-planners. First up are Carol and Mark. Mark works in sales and earns $80,000 a year, and Carol is an estate lawyer earning about $150,000 per year. They have a kid just finishing college and 20 years until retirement. They have a $250,000 mortgage. Carol and Mark aren't planning for retirement. It seems far into the future, and all the money that might have gone into savings went to paying for their kids' college. But when they do think about it, they can imagine a retirement lifestyle on about $175,000 per year, because they'll be finished paying their college bills and they hope their mortgage will be paid off. What should they do? First, Mark and Carol should make sure they never take another home equity loan. Yes, they did that to pay for their kids' college, and this is really important. They should set up a payment schedule to pay off the mortgage in less than 20 years. Second, they need to live on a lot less now. They need to start saving at least 15% of their income, $34,000 per year. If they're unwilling to save at all, they could plan to live later on just their Social Security at $5,000 a month. But that's not realistic given the drastic drop in lifestyle it'll require. Alternatively, they could save only 10% per year now, and one of them could work a few years longer. But that's a gamble. Their employers, their clients, the labor market, and their health all have to cooperate. Nick, debts and obligations. Next, meet Nick, a working class, hardworking guy. He's 49 years old, married, and works as a city bus driver. He's a bit young to be considering retirement, but the stress of the job and a bad back means that he wants to be able to cut back on full-time work in about 10 years. He earns $50,000 a year gross or pre-tax and saves about 4% a year or $2,000 of that income. This has given him about $25,000 in a retirement account. But Nick also has a hefty mortgage, credit card debt, and adult children who are in and out of marriages and jobs. Helping his kids out with their expenses is one reason Nick hasn't socked more away in his retirement account. How much will Nick and his wife need? The main question here, and it's important for Nick to answer this truthfully, is how long he can work. Realistically, he can probably continue driving a bus into his late 50s. That's not very old, but Nick's job is liable to cause him serious back injury, which could force him out of the driver's seat. He's also at risk of being laid off, unless he's in a union. If Nick avoids health issues and layoffs, he can keep driving a few years longer, into his early 60s. But even in that case, he'll need to find another job. Why? Nick's goal is to put off collecting Social Security as long as possible, because the longer he waits, the larger his monthly check will be. And with his minimal savings, he's going to need it. To expand a bit on Nick's situation, let's say that his wife is also working, earns about $50,000 per year as well, and will collect her own Social Security benefit. This gives Nick some breathing room. He doesn't have to worry much about her needs if he wants to retire earlier. If Nick's wife were younger and or not earning her own income, then it'd be a no-brainer. Nick would have to delay retirement as long as possible to provide for her. I ran the numbers on Nick's behalf. The AARP calculator tells me that Nick needs to start saving 15% per year and to work full-time at his current salary. If he does this, he can stop working at 65 and still maintain his standard of living. If he feels he can't increase his savings from 4% to 15%, the calculator gives Nick another option. He can work until he's 93. Scary. But now that reality has shaken him up. Nick can do something. First, Nick needs to pay off his mortgage and credit cards. If he doesn't, those debts could grow out of hand and threaten a financially secure old age. He should pay off those debts even before he starts setting money aside in retirement accounts. Why? Because there's no investment that'll do Nick as much good as not paying interest to the bank. Consider especially his credit card debt. The card companies are likely charging Nick about 15% interest. There's no investment Nick can make that has 15% returns, guaranteed and non-taxable. We'll talk more in Chapter 4 about why paying off debts even before investing is such a smart idea. A side note here. Some financial experts, I'm one of them, would advise Nick to set aside a little money toward retirement even while he's paying off his debts, just to get in the habit of saving. Most important, given his health and low savings levels, Nick needs to plan to live on less in retirement than he does now. Why less? Isn't the point of all this to maintain one's pre-retirement standard of living? It is, but remember that in general, the best case scenario is that we'll have 80% of our prior income. So for most people, some downsizing will be necessary. Complicating the situation is the fact that many Americans are already living above their means, like Nick. He wouldn't be in debt if he weren't spending more than he earns. That's going to make for an even ruder awakening in retirement. If Nick is wise, he'll start trimming the flab from his lifestyle now. Learning how to live well on less, it'll make for a much smoother transition later. Finally, there's one more hard thing Nick has to do. He needs to have a frank talk with his children. They simply can't depend on mom and dad helping them out financially anymore. Every dollar that Nick and his wife don't have to spend on their daily needs now has to go to paying off debts and saving for their future. Jennifer. Hands off the portfolio. Now let's look at Jennifer. She's 57 years old and divorced, a high-end real estate broker earning $125,000 a year. In addition, Jennifer's divorce and an inheritance have given her a whopping lump sum of $500,000. She's planning to work at the same pace until age 67. Saving 10% of her earnings, and then she'll like to maintain about the same standard of living in retirement. Can she achieve that? With her generous net worth, solid income, good savings habits, and future Social Security benefit, Jennifer is likely to meet that goal. She'll be able to live comfortably on 70 to 80% of her current income. Since some of her current expenses will go away, she won't have to maintain a work wardrobe, for example, and she won't be putting all those miles on her car or upgrading to a better one every couple of years. Almost as important, Jennifer won't be saving for retirement anymore. However, if Jennifer's investments earn less than 3% annually, she may have to work longer or live on less than $87,500 per year. Why would her return on investment fall short? A common reason is that an educated person like Jennifer, interested in her finances, might manage her retirement account too closely. She could make unwise decisions, for example, frequently buying and selling on the day's headlines, and costing herself in brokerage commissions. High investment and banking fees are the little-known thieves of savings, doing their insidious work unnoticed while everyone is focused on market ups and downs. I talk more about fees and how they undermine savings in Chapter 5. But here's the point. Jennifer's return is 3%. So if her fees and charges are the typical 2%, she would earn just 1%. Even if inflation is at a low 2%, Jennifer will be losing 1% a year. This is a common pitfall for higher net worth individuals like Jennifer. Paul, frugal to the bone. What about the extremely frugal? Will a penny pinching lifestyle allow you to be comfortable in retirement regardless of your income level? To answer that, let's consider Paul. He's a 63-year-old widower and former newspaper ad salesman. Unfortunately, Paul has no savings, but he's got a few things going for him. He's in good health at present, and his house, which his wife inherited from her parents, is completely paid for. He gets about $16,000 a year from Social Security. Perhaps most important, Paul has trimmed his expenses to the bone. He never buys anything new, instead hunting garage sales and secondhand stores. He has a large vegetable garden in the backyard, and he's very handy at keeping his old car running and fixing whatever breaks around the house. Paul's dilemma. There are expenses that, unfortunately, even extreme frugality can't stave off. Paul will have to work part-time at $20,000 a year indefinitely to afford things like Medicare copays, house taxes, and upkeep, and groceries. So, how ready for retirement are you? Do you just have to maintain your current course, or are you readying your mountain climbing gear for a nearly sheer ascent? Remember that I said this plan was simple, but simple does not necessarily mean easy. For some readers, like our hypothetical Nick, the bus driver, there's a lot of work to do. In the chapters ahead, I get into useful ideas for saving and investing. But first, I'm going to talk about work during your later years and about that all-important question, the age at which you should start taking your Social Security benefits. Chapter 3, Working. Or will the job market be through with you before you're through with it? Work. It may be the biggest love-hate relationship in your life. It keeps you young. No, it's taking years off your life. You meet many of your closest friends there. Yet you wish you could work from home, free from the distractions and drama of coworkers. You're thrilled to hear the words, "When can you start?" But the euphoria fades once you actually start clocking in. And of course, like many of us, you can't wait for the day when you can retire. That is, until the time comes when you're not just daydreaming, but seriously considering whether it's time to control your own time. At that point, the decision to quit working becomes as momentous as deciding what to do for a living once was for your younger self. In this chapter, I discuss the keep working or retire decision, the advantages of delaying Social Security benefits, and how to maximize the chances that you'll be welcome in the workforce later in life. Social Security, the delay that pays. Most of us have daydreamed about winning the lottery. Your fantasy probably includes quitting your job, your coworkers watching in envy and awe as you clean out your desk. Though retirement isn't as thrilling a prospect, it's still something we look forward to. Unfortunately, unless you're unusually well prepared for retirement, one of the smartest decisions you can make is to put off the day you start collecting Social Security. The government pays a maximum benefit at age 70. I discussed this in Chapter 2. The government calculates your benefit based on a normal retirement age of between 65 and 67, depending on when you were born. The system takes an early retirement deduction before then and gives you a delayed retirement credit for every year you delay collecting between the normal retirement age and age 70. The deduction and credits depend on the year you were born. The most drastic cut comes when you collect Social Security at the earliest possible age, 62. The greatest amount in credit comes if you delay collecting until 70. Putting off collecting is a very smart decision for most people, but not everybody. If you have a shorter than average life expectancy and no dependents, collecting early will maximize your lifetime benefits. Let's illustrate this by using Nick, the bus driver with a yearly income of $50,000, who we met in Chapter 2. Nick is aware that he's unlikely to keep driving much past age 60, so he'd prefer to retire and start collecting a Social Security check at 62. But if he does, he'll suffer an approximately 43% cut, getting a check for only $1,131. If he retires at what the government defines as normal retirement age, 67, he'll earn approximately a benefit of $1,587. However, if he holds off until age 70, he'll get his maximum benefit of $1,984 per month. That's obviously the best deal financially. However, it's worth noting that Nick's life expectancy could play a role in his decision about when to retire. If Nick is a smoker whose parents both died relatively young, he might tell himself that realistically, he's unlikely to live past his 70s. If Nick works until age 70 but lives only to age 78, something interesting happens to the lifetime amount he collects from Social Security. It goes down. Why? Because even though he gets a bigger monthly check, he receives it for fewer years. He receives only $190,464 total, compared with the $215,040 he would have gotten by retiring at age 62. Not to mention the pleasure of extra years of leisure. Of course, Nick probably isn't framing the keep working or retire decision in terms of his lifetime total in Social Security income. When Nick makes this decision, he'll be asking himself, how badly do I want to quit working versus is $1,131 a month going to be enough? The answer to that is going to depend largely on how much money Nick has saved up. Remember, Social Security is insurance, not a retirement plan in itself. So if Nick does a good job in pulling his finances together and saving at a higher rate, the things I recommended for him in Chapter 2, he'll be more likely to have enough post-retirement income to retire earlier than 70. However, there's a problem. All of this assumes that Nick can work as late in life as he chooses. That's not necessarily the case. Nick might decide to stay at his job into his late 60s, but the realities of life as a bus driver, the physical stress, and the potential medical issues make it unlikely he'll be able to do so. He's going to need to find another job if he's going to keep working. He's going to need to find another job if he's going to keep working until the government's normal retirement age, or even the age 70. Nick is faced with the prospect of something that he thought he'd left behind years ago: job hunting. Is he going to be welcome in the job market at age 60-something? Are you? When 60 is the new 17. Here's an interesting fact about the current normal retirement age. The Social Security Act of 1935 set that age at 65. Why the change to 67? According to the Social Security website, Congress cited improvements in the health of older people and increase in average life expectancy as primary reasons for increasing the normal retirement age. Currently, there are calls for the retirement age to be raised to age 70, again citing gains in average longevity. According to supporters of this idea, people can easily work longer because they are living longer. Things just aren't that simple. Yes, on average, life expectancies in America are rising, but averages aren't everyone. Almost all the gains in longevity have gone to higher than average income earners. In addition, those educated, affluent people are the ones most likely to be welcome in the workplace late in life, as part-time consultants or emeritus professors. Of course, highly educated people are the least likely to need work at that age, since they usually had the means to save enough for retirement. For people who spent their lives farther down the income scale, the prospects aren't nearly as shiny. Former line cooks don't usually set up successful consulting firms on line cooking issues, and I don't think I've ever seen a 70-year-old bricklayer emeritus spreading mortar 2 mornings a week just to keep himself busy. Many elders are forced to take poor quality jobs in retail and service. Most employers won't train older workers, and in soft labor markets, age discrimination is rampant. In short, it's a catch-22. Those most likely to need work later in life are the least likely to find it. But let's say you want and need to work after age 65. Your first choice, most likely, would be to simply stay at the job you have now. If only that were always possible. Maybe your company wants to replace you with a young, recent graduate they can hire at a starting salary, or they're cutting back to a smaller workforce overall, or they're moving jobs overseas. For you, the result is the same: unemployment. If you can't stay with your longtime employer, probably your second choice is to stay in the same field. But as soon as you search for open positions in that field, you're competing once again with those young recent graduates. It's the classic matchup: age and experience versus youth and energy. Older workers have solid resumes and years of practical know-how, but young job applicants are willing to work for lower pay to get experience. They have few medical problems that will interfere with productivity, and health insurance costs less for young people. Many can pull all-nighters because they have no children to care for. Finally, they're usually up to speed on the newest forms of technology. It's easy to see why they're so attractive to the human resource department. If you can't stay in your current job or even your current field, where do you look for work? Your last resort is likely to be a low-skilled position in retail or the service sector. Put another way, well, I can always be a Walmart greeter. These jobs almost never pay as much as the one you left. 70 isn't really the new 50. Increasingly, it's the new 17. And I'm talking about income here, not sex. This may not hurt just your pride. It will hurt your bottom line as well. According to the Government Accountability Office, when laid off, older workers do get rehired. And not all do. They take an average 15% hit in wages. Another piece of grim news, I know they've been coming thick and fast, is this. Employers may not be thrilled to see you coming when you're applying for those retail or service jobs. New York Times reporters Steve Greenhouse and Michael Barbaro reported on an embarrassing internal memo to Walmart's board of directors in 2005 that discussed ways to discourage older workers from seeking or staying at jobs at Walmart stores. Among the methods, which were characterized as ways to hold down spending on health care and other benefits, were ensuring that every job required physical tasks, stocking shelves, gathering carts, that older and less healthy workers would find difficult. Even when you're not applying to work at a big box store, the labor market can be tough all around. A friend of mine, laid off at 53, was sent to job counseling for executives. In part, the counselor's blunt advice was lose weight and take Prozac. Bear in mind, layoffs aren't the only thing standing between you and working past age 65. Poor health is the enemy of productivity. Illness and disability rob many people first of their jobs and then of their appeal to potential new employers. And don't forget, it's not just you who might get sick. The health problems of a spouse or partner can take nearly as heavy a toll. According to a McKinsey & Company survey, 40% of workers are forced to retire earlier than they had planned, with their health or the health of a family member the reason cited for more than half of those early retirements. A few ways to beat the odds. Ultimately, no matter how much you want to work later in life, a job may not be there for you. That's partly what this chapter is about. Helping you face the difficult truth of that the workplace might let go of you before you're ready to leave. In light of that, the other aspects of your retirement plan, how you save, invest, and even vote, become even more important. But because many older people want and need to keep working, here are some ways to increase your appeal to other employers. 1. Stay technologically literate. Hey, don't look at me, you might be saying. It's not like I'm still on MySpace. But technological proficiency isn't a destination. It's a journey, an ongoing one. You might feel you're up to speed now, but someday you'll tell a younger coworker that you're going to text them and they'll say, "What is this, 2016? Don't text me, just brainwave me on my neurotenna." It'll happen before you know it. Don't spike the ball on the 40-yard line. Keep moving forward. There are advantages to tech literacy that go beyond how hireable you look to an employer. First, advances in technology tend to make jobs easier, not harder. If they didn't, they wouldn't replace old methods. Second, jobs that require technological proficiency tend to be desk jobs, which would be the kind you'll need if you have age-related physical limitations. 2, get mid-career education. You wouldn't want an operation to be done by a surgeon who finished his residency in 1998 and then never updated his skills. You'd want somebody who's kept on top of new procedures and techniques. What applies to medicine applies to many other fields. It isn't just elite professionals who need mid-career education. Software and technological devices are used in a great many fields, and they're constantly changing. And that's not all. New machines, new markets, new techniques, new ideas, new priorities. You'll face some or all of those over the course of a long career. Be interested, be engaged, and embrace the change. 3, make and keep friends in your line of work. Yes, networking was one of the most ubiquitous buzzwords of the 1990s. But networking was a popular concept for a reason. It paid off. It still does. If you've been laid off, connections and goodwill are incredibly important to getting that next job. People will pick up the phone and talk to someone they know and like. They're much less likely to answer a phone message with an unfamiliar name and number attached. 4, scale back your expectations. As we've already noted, it'd be ideal to keep working in your chosen field, the one in which you spent most of your career. But that may not be possible. Statistics tell us that employers in manufacturing, finance, insurance, wholesale trade, scientific and technical services, arts and entertainment, and the recreation industry all have a strong bias toward hiring younger people. However, older workers may find jobs in home health care. Quite the irony, old people taking care of old people. Retail trade management, administrative support, waste management services, education, healthcare, and the social assistance sector. The point? The job that's open might not be the job you want. You might be thinking, I'll pack it in and retire before I work behind a bakery counter. That's your prerogative. But always remember, the 30% reduction in your Social Security check that you face if you retire at age 62 on the one hand, and on the other hand, the premium you'll get by staying employed until 70. The government is giving you an incentive to stay in the workforce. It's in your best interest to take it. For that reason, you'll need to be both determined and humble when job hunting. So far, I've asked you to look at some hard truths and do some painful calculations. I've asked you to estimate your own lifespan. Then I asked you to calculate how much money you'll need for retirement and to take a clear-eyed look at how far off track you are in getting there. Finally, I've pointed out that you might not be able to work late in life, no matter how much you want to. But now we're going to look at solutions. In the next chapter, I discuss the role savings will play in getting you back on track to retire and some practical ways you can trim your spending. Thank you guys for tuning in to the first half of the book, How to Retire with Enough Money and How to Know What Enough Is by Teresa Ghilarducci. I hope it's brought value to your life or your business. If it has, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. The second half of the book will be out soon. I'm your jack of all trades, and until next time, get money, people.